My own daughter, the one I poured every single second of my life into, looked right into my eyes and told me my room was no longer mine. Can you believe that? My room, the one I'd called my sanctuary for years. It still feels like a punch to the gut just thinking about it. Not a scream, not an argument, just those quiet, devastating words, delivered with a coldness that still chills me to the bone. She said it to please Margaret. Margaret, her husband's mother, a woman I barely knew until recently, who seemed to view me as nothing more than an old, creaky piece of furniture in her way. A nuisance, someone to be moved aside without a second thought. It wasn't just about the room, you see, it was the way it was done. The utter lack of warmth, of respect. It was as if all the years, all the love, all the sacrifices I had made simply dissolved into thin air right there in front of me. In that moment, she didn't just take a room filled with my things, my memories, my very scent. She took my breath away. It felt like she reached right into my chest and pulled something vital out, stripped me bare of my dignity. And then, as if that wasn't enough, she added the final blow. She was removing me from her will, just like that, as if I depended on her crumbs to exist, as if my life, my future, hung on her generosity. It was such a cruel, unnecessary sting. My heart ached, a deep, hollow ache that spread through every part of me. They stood there, my daughter and Margaret, looking at me. Pity, sure, but mostly superiority. Ingratitude was plastered all over their faces, shining like a neon sign. They thought they were dealing with a fragile old woman, forgetful, easily manipulated, someone they could just move from one corner of the house to another, like a vase or a dusty old book. They saw me as weak, as someone whose time was simply running out. And in that moment, I probably looked the part. My shoulders slumped, my hands trembled, and I felt utterly, utterly lost. But they didn't know. Oh, they really didn't know. By pushing me into that small back room, a tiny cubicle that felt more like a closet than a bedroom, they weren't getting rid of me. They were giving me something far more dangerous to them. They were giving me silence. And in that silence, I started to remember. To truly remember who I was. Who I had always been, before I let myself become so comfortable, so reliant on what I thought was their love. I remembered things I had kept hidden for decades. Things in a dusty leather folder, tucked away deep in my old chest, almost forgotten. Almost. The humiliation, that raw, burning shame of being cast aside by my own child. It wasn't the end. It was the spark that ignited a strength I barely remembered possessing. A strength I thought I'd lost somewhere along the way, buried under years of caring for others, putting everyone else first. They truly believed they had won, that they had bent me to their will, that I would just quietly accept my new, diminished place. They expected tears, arguments, pleading perhaps, but they got silence from me, a very different kind of silence. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined, was that the game had only just begun. And the rules? Well, the rules had always, always been mine. They were just about to find that out. And I was about to remind them. My name is Eleanor. I'm 72 years old. 72 years of living, of loving, of working. Most of those years I spent behind a sewing machine. My fingers, even now, feel the phantom hum of the motor. First, I was an employee, just a young woman trying to make ends meet. Then, after years of dreaming and saving every penny, I became the owner of my own local dressmaking business. A small shop, not fancy, but it was mine. It smelled of new fabric and possibility. That's how I made my way in the world. That's how I built my life. I raised my daughter, Sarah, with the sweat of my labor. She was my whole world, the reason I got up every morning, the dream I poured everything into. I was mother and father rolled into one. Her father left when she was just a baby. He just vanished, like a puff of smoke, and it was just me and her. Every sacrifice I made, every extra hour I worked, every stitch I sewed, I did it with a smile, dreaming of giving her a better life than mine, a life full of comfort, of security. I wanted her to have everything I didn't. When she got married, I thought it was the start of a new, beautiful chapter for all of us. I was ready to slow down a little, to enjoy my golden years. So I sold my small dressmaking business. Every last cent, every bit of hard-earned money from decades of work, I used it. It all went for the down payment on the house. This house, the one where we would all live together. Sarah, her husband David, and me. It was a large house, much bigger than I ever thought I'd live in. And it had a garden, a big, wild space that I spent countless hours taming and nurturing, planting every flower myself. My routine back then, before all this started, it was simple and happy, genuinely happy. I'd wake up with the sun, sip my tea, and then head straight out to my garden. I loved digging in the soil, watching things grow. It was my calm. Then there was Sunday lunch. That was my thing. I'd spend Saturday planning, Sunday morning cooking, filling the house with the smells of roasting chicken and fresh bread. It was our family meal. Everyone gathered around the big kitchen table, laughing. And my grandchildren? Sarah and David's children. They were my absolute joy. I loved helping to look after them, reading them stories, watching them play in the garden I'd built. My room, the one they just took from me, that was my sanctuary. For me, that house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the materialization of a lifetime of work, of sacrifice, of dreams. It was supposed to be a safe haven for my old age and for my family's future. For all of us together. I felt useful there, loved, and above all, I felt truly, completely at home. I believed that the love I gave, that boundless, unconditional love I had for my daughter and her family, that was the greatest security I could have. I trusted them blindly. Why wouldn't I? I'd poured my past into that house, and I'd put my entire future into my daughter's hands. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. I thought we were building something together, a legacy of love and family. But what I didn't know yet, what I was only just beginning to understand in the crushing silence of that tiny back room, was that for her, For my daughter Sarah, that house wasn't a home at all. Not in the way I understood it. No, for her, it was something else entirely. It was just an asset, something to be controlled, something to be manipulated. And I was just starting to see how much control she really wanted. Margaret, my daughter Sarah's mother-in-law, she's the one who changed everything. She became a widow, newly alone after her husband passed. And that's when she started visiting our house every single day. At first, it seemed harmless. Just quick stops, a cup of tea, a chat. My daughter Sarah seemed happy to have her around, and I tried to be welcoming too. After all, she was family now, in a way. Then the visits turned into lunches. Every day, Margaret would be there, sitting at my kitchen table, eating the food I cooked. Soon, she didn't just visit, she stayed. I remember noticing one morning, she already had a drawer in the kitchen cabinet, her own drawer, filled with her tea bags, her special sugar, her own little whisk. It was a tiny detail, but it stuck with me, like she was slowly, quietly, moving in without anyone saying a word. And with that drawer came her opinions on everything. What we should have for dinner, how the laundry should be folded, even how the children should be disciplined. Margaret was a woman of elegant gestures, always perfectly put together, even just for a casual visit. But her words, they were sharp, always polite, but with an edge that could cut. And gradually, I watched my daughter Sarah start to mirror her. It was subtle at first, just a certain tilt of her head, a way of gesturing with her hand. But then it became more. My opinions, the ones I'd always shared freely in my own home, started to be ignored. It happened slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. I'd suggest something for lunch or offer advice about one of the grandchildren, and Sarah would just brush it aside, always with the same dismissive phrase, delivered with a falsely sweet tone. Margaret thinks it's better this way, Mom. Or, Margaret has a different idea. It wasn't an argument. It was a quiet erasure. Slowly, I began to feel invited to withdraw. That's the only way I can describe it. When visitors arrived, friends of Sarah and David, or even some of our old neighbors, Sarah would turn to me, her voice dripping with a concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom," she'd say, "why don't you go to your room to rest? You look tired." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction, and it happened more and more often. I, who had always been the welcoming hostess, the heart of that home, was becoming a peripheral figure, a shadow, moving quietly through the corners, trying not to be seen. The disregard wasn't a shouting match. It was quiet. Like a slow, dull knife, it cut deep. Every time it left a new wound. I'd try to talk to Sarah, to catch her alone and ask if I had done something wrong. "Is everything all right, dear?" I'd ask, my voice a little shaky. "Have I upset you?" But she always dodged. Always. She'd sigh or roll her eyes slightly when she thought I wasn't looking, and then she'd say I was too sensitive. "You're just overthinking things, Mom. You're getting emotional." The pain of that indifference, that cold shoulder from my own daughter, it settled in my chest. A heavy, constant sadness. It was like a knot that wouldn't loosen. I'd sit in the kitchen, drinking my coffee alone, listening to their laughter. Sarah and Margaret, They'd be in the living room, talking and laughing, their voices bright and happy, and I'd just sit there, a silent observer in my own home, wondering, where had I gone wrong? What had I done to deserve this? Had I loved too much? Had I given too much? I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just about Margaret taking over or Sarah changing. It felt deeper, colder. But what I didn't know yet, what I was still blind to, was that this wasn't just indifference. It wasn't just a slow, subtle pushing me aside. Oh no, this was a plan, a very careful, very deliberate plan, and it was already being put into action. The explosion came on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the exact day, the light through the living room windows, the way the dust motes danced in the air, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit me. Sarah and Margaret called me for a conversation, they said. A casual chat, perhaps, about family matters. I walked into the living room, the same room where I'd shared so many happy moments, so many holidays, so many quiet evenings with my daughter. They were already seated on the sofa, side by side, like two conspirators. Margaret had that familiar slight smile, a glimmer in her eyes I couldn't quite place then, but I understand now. Sarah, my own Sarah, couldn't look me in the eyes. She stared at a spot just over my shoulder, or at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. That's how it began. She cleared her throat, a little nervous cough, and started to speak. Her voice was too calm, too measured. She said that Margaret, poor dear Margaret, was very lonely after her husband's passing, that she needed companionship, a place to truly belong, and that they, Sarah and David, my son-in-law, Sarah's husband, had decided she would come live with us, permanently. The words hung in the air, heavy and solid, like stones. I stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to process it. Margaret, sitting right next to Sarah, finally met my gaze. And this time, there was no mistaking the look in her eyes. It was triumphant, a subtle yet undeniable victory dance playing out on her face. Like she had finally claimed her prize, my home. And then came the blow. The first one, anyway. Sarah continued, her voice still unnervingly steady. "And Mom," she began, "we've been talking, Margaret and we realized Margaret needs to feel comfortable here. She's used to a larger space. So we need your room, my room, the one I loved, the one I'd filled with lavender and memories. She needed my room, for Margaret, to feel more comfortable." The words were like a physical shove. For me, she explained, there would be David's old office. My son-in-law David, he worked from home sometimes and had this tiny space at the very back of the house. A cubicle, really. Not even a proper room, just a small, cramped space, barely big enough for a desk and a chair. It had a small window, she added, almost as an afterthought. A small window that looked out onto nothing but the side of the neighbor's wall. A dead end. From my bright, airy sanctuary to a cubicle looking at a brick wall, it was a clear message. I was being shunted aside, moved to the fringes, made invisible. I could feel a coldness spreading through me, starting from my chest, reaching my fingertips and toes. My mind reeled. trying to grasp the enormity of what she was saying. My room gone, my space invaded, my life upended. While I was still trying to process the shock, still struggling to find my voice, Sarah delivered the final, devastating blow. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping, as if sharing a secret. "Mom," she said, "I've also been organizing my documents lately. Just tidying things up, you know." She paused, then continued, her voice flat. "And I redid my will. A will. What did that have to do with me?" Then she said it. "I thought it best to focus the future on my children. You understand, don't you? My grandchildren. Her children. Not me. Not their grandmother who had helped raise them, who had poured her life into their mother." It was a declaration, a chillingly clear statement that I was no longer part of her life, neither the future nor the present. I wasn't just losing my room. I was losing my place in her family, in her heart. She humiliated me, right there, in front of Margaret, who watched with a satisfied smirk. "I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request." They watched me, Sarah and Margaret, their eyes full of expectation. They saw me, I'm sure, as defeated. An old woman, stripped of her home, her dignity, her very future. They probably thought I would crumble, that I would accept my fate with meekness. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't see, behind my silent, still face, was that the silence wasn't one of defeat at all. It was the silence of something breaking, yes, but also of something profoundly and clearly deciding. A quiet shift within me, a profound resolve forming. It was the silence before a storm they never saw coming. I didn't cry in front of them, not a single tear. I wouldn't give Margaret the pleasure of seeing me collapse, of seeing me break down. My face must have been a mask. I just stood there for a moment, letting their words settle, letting the coldness seep in. Then, with a calm that truly surprised me, a quiet strength I didn't know I still possessed, I simply nodded. One slow, deliberate nod. Then I turned and I walked away, straight to my room, my sanctuary for what little time it had left. The door closed softly behind me, and there I was, in the middle of all my memories. Every photo frame, every little trinket, every familiar item suddenly felt charged with meaning, with pain. With that same surprising calm, I began to gather my clothes. Just the essentials, just a few personal items. Each time, I took a photo down from the wall, a picture of Sarah as a child, or of us laughing together on a holiday. It felt like a stab to the heart, a fresh wound opening up. But each stab was also a reminder, a sharp, clear reminder of who I was, who I had always been before I got so caught up in being a mother, a grandmother, a caregiver. Before I lost myself in that family, in their lives. The sun started to set, the light in my room faded, and still I worked, packing my few things, moving from one life to another, in the same house, a strange, silent migration. When I was done, I picked up the small bag I had packed, and with one last look at the empty walls, the bare shelves, I walked out. I walked down the hall, past the living room, where their voices drifted, oblivious, or perhaps uncaring, that I was moving. And I went to the back of the house, to David's old office, to my new stuffy back room. Locked in that tiny cubicle, with its small window looking out onto nothing but a brick wall, that's when the pain truly hit. It wasn't the shock anymore. It was the raw, burning truth of it all. I cried for hours, not out of sadness, no, not the helpless, pitiful tears of a defeated old woman. These tears were different. They were hot, bitter tears of anger. Anger at what they had done, at their cruelty, and most of all, grief. A profound, aching grief for the daughter I thought I had raised, the one I thought I knew, the one who had vanished, replaced by this cold stranger. My chest ached with it, a heavy, suffocating ache. I lay there on the small bed, curled up, letting the sobs rack my body. And in the midst of that crying, when I felt like there was nothing left inside me but this raw, burning pain, a memory surfaced. It wasn't a slow realization. It was a flash, clear as water, like a sudden burst of sunlight breaking through the clouds. A memory of something I had tucked away so long ago, I'd almost forgotten its existence. The memory of a dusty leather folder, one I kept right at the bottom of my old wooden chest, the one I brought with me when I moved into this house. Inside it, I remembered now, was more than just old papers. It was the proof of my hard work, the very origin of everything they thought belonged to them by right. Everything they were trying to take from me. And right then, in that instant, a quiet determination solidified inside me. I wasn't going to leave. Not now. Not like this. They thought they had pushed me aside, that they had won. But no, I decided right then and there that I would stay. I would observe them. I would wait. I wasn't going to give away my power so easily. They had given me the role of a victim, pushed me into this dark, forgotten corner. But I was going to write my own ending, and it wasn't going to be anything like they expected. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't possibly have imagined as I lay there in the dark, was that their greed, their insatiable desire to take everything, would push them even further, to an even greater level of cruelty, and that, in doing so, they would unwittingly give me exactly what I needed to finish writing my story, my way. My silent presence in that small back room, that cramped cubicle at the back of the house, it started to bother them. I could feel it, like a pebble in their shoe, a constant reminder I was still there, still watching. I wasn't making a fuss. I wasn't complaining. I was just there. And that seemed to be the problem. I'd always contributed my pension to the household expenses. For years, every month, that money went into the shared pot, used for groceries, for utility bills, for everything that kept the house running. But I stopped. I just stopped. The money, which used to disappear into their system, now stayed with me, tucked away. The reaction was immediate. My daughter Sarah and her husband David, they didn't waste any time. They confronted me. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. They stood in the narrow hallway, blocking my way to the kitchen, their faces tight. Sarah spoke first, her voice sharp, saying I had an obligation to help. An obligation to help in the house I bought, the house where I lived. She said I was ungrateful for living there as a favor. A favor in my own home. David nodded along, his arms crossed, a stern look on his face. And Margaret, who always seemed to appear out of nowhere when there was conflict, she chimed in, loud enough for me, and probably the neighbors, to hear. She said I was getting senile. Just like that. A crazy old woman. The tension in the house became unbearable. It wasn't just words anymore. It was in the air, thick and heavy. They stopped speaking to me altogether. Not a good morning, not a good night, nothing. It was like I was a complete stranger, a ghost haunting my own hallways. They would eat dinner in the dining room, talking and laughing, and I'd find my meal later, cold leftovers, sometimes just a plate in the fridge, not even a word to say it was there, just a silent, demeaning gesture. It felt like they were trying to erase me, day by day, piece by piece. The height of their cruelty, the moment that truly made my blood run cold, happened one evening. I was in my small room, the door slightly ajar, just enough to catch the sounds from the living room. Sarah was talking to David on the phone. Her voice was low, but I could make out enough. She was setting up a consultation with a lawyer. My heart started to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. What could they possibly want with a lawyer? Then the pieces clicked into place. The hushed tones, the hurried words, the way they'd been treating me. Plan was clear, crystal clear. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent. That's what they were discussing. Mental confusion, they'd allege. Senility. They wanted to gain control of my pension, my assets, everything I had worked for. They wanted to take it all. Not just the house, not just my dignity, but my very identity, my ability to make decisions for myself. In that moment, lying there in the dark, in the room they had pushed me into, I understood. It was no longer about ingratitude. It was no longer about lack of space. It was a calculated, vicious plan. A plan to steal everything from me. Every single thing. I felt a cold fear creep in. It wrapped around my heart, squeezed it tight. But beneath that fear, something else burned. My anger. It was greater, so much greater. They had crossed the last frontier. The line was gone. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have understood, was that by trying to silence me, by trying to steal my mind along with my money, they had given me something far more powerful. They had given me the final weapon I needed. The next day, a Monday, I woke up with a quiet resolve I hadn't felt in years. The fear was still there, a faint echo, but it was overshadowed by something stronger, a clarity. I had a choice. I could let them declare me incompetent, take everything, and vanish into some care home, a forgotten old woman. Or I could fight. And fighting, I realized, was what I was born to do. I had fought for my business, fought to raise Sarah alone, fought for this house. I wasn't about to stop now. I went to the kitchen, made my coffee, and sat at the small table, just like any other morning. Sarah and David were already there, Margaret fussing around the counter. Their usual cold silence greeted me. I took a deep breath. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "David." "And Margaret." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over each of them. "I'd like to call a meeting. in the living room, this afternoon." They stopped. Sarah turned, a questioning frown on her face. David looked wary. Margaret, however, just smiled. A slow, knowing smile that was supposed to disarm me. I saw it then. They thought I was going to give in, that I was going to apologize for not contributing, for being sensitive, for everything they had accused me of. They probably thought I'd finally beg them to let me stay, to reconsider the will, to let me have my old room back. They saw my request for a meeting as a sign of weakness, of my surrender. "Oh, Mom," Sarah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Are you sure you're feeling up to it? You've seemed a bit preoccupied lately." David nodded, looking at me with what he probably thought was pity. Margaret just watched, a glint in her eyes. I didn't respond to their bait. I just repeated, "This afternoon." In the living room, I also asked an old friend to be present. Their faces changed. The smiles faded. "A friend?" David asked, his brows furrowed. "Who?" "Arthur," I said calmly. "Arthur Jenkins. He's a retired lawyer. Just as a witness." They didn't like that. Not one bit. I could see the suspicion in their eyes, the calculations, but they didn't refuse. I suppose they were too confident, too sure of their victory, too convinced that whatever Arthur was there for, it wouldn't change the fact that I was old, frail, and had nothing. They accepted, albeit reluctantly, sure of their impending triumph. That afternoon, the living room felt charged. Arthur sat quietly in an armchair, a kind, reassuring presence. Sarah, David, and Margaret sat on the sofa, a united front. Margaret even had a faint smile, a predatory anticipation. I sat opposite them, the old leather folder clutched in my hands. "Well, Mom," Sarah began, her voice back to that rehearsed, overly concerned tone. "We're here. What is it you wanted to discuss?" She launched into her speech. It was exactly as I had predicted. About my fragile health, my forgetfulness, their deep concern for my financial well-being. They spoke about how difficult it was for them to manage with me not contributing, how they only wanted what was best for me. It was all a preamble, a carefully constructed narrative to justify their actions, to paint me as the problem, the burden. They wanted to make sure Arthur, the lawyer, heard their side, their seemingly benevolent intentions. I just listened. I let them speak, let their words hang in the air, each one a fresh insult, a new layer of calculated cruelty. When Sarah finished, a triumphant look on her face, like she'd just delivered a flawless closing argument, there was a brief silence, a moment of expectation. They waited for me to crumple, to plead, to confess. Instead, I slowly, deliberately placed the worn leather folder on the coffee table between us. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice, when it came, was firm, clear. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my gaze steady on Sarah. She blinked, surprised by my directness. "Yes, Mom. I think we've made our position clear." "Good," I said, and then with a slow, deliberate movement, I opened the folder. Inside, neat and protected, was the original deed to this house. The house they thought was theirs. I took it out, unfolded it, and laid it flat on the table, turning it so they could all see. It was clean, clear, and registered solely in my name, Eleanor Dawson. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just a pause in conversation. It was a sudden, absolute vacuum. Margaret's smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Her mouth actually opened slightly, like a fish out of water. David's face went white, then red. Sarah, my daughter, stared at the document, her eyes wide, unblinking, as if she was seeing a ghost. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and shocked. They couldn't speak. Not a single sound. "This house," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the sudden stillness, "was never yours, not in any way that truly matters." I looked at each of them, letting the words sink in. I bought this property, every brick, every window, every inch of this garden, with the money from the sale of my dressmaking business. The work of a lifetime. My lifetime. I paused, my eyes finding Sarah's, holding them. I allowed you to live here, under my roof, thinking we were a family, thinking we were building a life together. My voice grew stronger, firmer, cutting through the stunned silence. "Sarah, you didn't kick me out of my room. You see, you don't have that right, because you and your family are merely my guests." My eyes moved from Sarah to David, then to Margaret. "You have been living in my home for free, under my generosity. And starting today," I continued, "your days as guests in this house are numbered." There was a collective gasp from the sofa, a small, choked sound. But they still couldn't speak. Their faces were a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. They had believed, truly believed, that they held all the cards, that I was powerless, that I was a burden they could dispose of. And in that one moment, with one piece of paper, I had turned their world upside down. It wasn't vengeance I felt, not truly. It was a profound sense of justice, a reclamation of what was rightfully mine, a dignity I thought I had lost. The silence lingered, heavy with their dawning realization. They had wanted to steal my home, my money, my very identity. But what they didn't know was that justice would come not with the bitterness of revenge, but with the quiet, profound peace of having my home back. And the future? The immediate future was now a blank canvas, ready for me to paint anew. But first, they would have to leave. The waiting game was over. The game, as I said before, was always mine. And now I was ready to play my winning hand. Their departure was swift and silent. There were no apologies, not a single word of regret, just bitterness in their eyes, a cold, hard anger at being exposed. Margaret was the first to disappear. One morning, her things were gone from the kitchen drawer. Her car was gone from the driveway, and she just vanished without even a goodbye, like she was never truly there. Sarah left the key on the kitchen table a few days later. She didn't look at me, just placed it down, her shoulders slumped, and left. David followed soon after. The front door closed, and the silence that remained wasn't loneliness. No, it was pure, unadulterated relief. I could finally breathe in my own home. I went straight back to my room, the one that was truly mine. I opened the windows wide, letting the fresh air sweep through, chasing away the stale smell of other people's presence. The sun poured in, warming the walls, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air. Slowly, day by day, the house began to feel like mine again. Every corner, every surface, every sunlit spot began to hum with my own energy. I planted new flowers in the garden, bright, cheerful colors, something to welcome the new beginning. I went back to cooking my favorite meals, the ones that filled the house with comforting aromas, not just leftovers. My old friend Arthur, the retired lawyer, he started visiting me for afternoon coffee. He'd bring over a newspaper, and we'd sit in the garden, talking for hours. Our conversations were simple, about the present, about the books we read, the news, and the small joys of everyday life. No more drama, no more calculated moves, just easy, comfortable friendship. It was a new kind of companionship, one built on genuine respect and shared laughter, not on obligation or hidden agendas. I thought I might become a bitter person after all that. I really did, after being treated so cruelly, by my own daughter, no less. But I didn't. On the contrary, I found a serenity I hadn't known in years, a deep, quiet peace that settled over me like a warm blanket. The pain of betrayal, it left a scar, of course it did. It's a part of my story now, but that scar, it doesn't hurt anymore. Instead, it reminds me every single day of the strength I possess, the resilience I found when I thought I had nothing left. The joy of waking up in my own bed, in my own room, in my own house, is something no money can buy. It's a feeling of absolute belonging, of being truly, unequivocally home. It's waking up with a clean soul, knowing that the air I breathe is mine, the space around me is mine, and my life, finally, is mine again. But what I didn't know was that my story could serve as a mirror for so many other people. But what I didn't know was that my story could serve as a mirror for so many other people. It's strange, isn't it? I had to be treated like a burden, like a nuisance, in the very house I myself built, brick by brick, with my own hands and my life's savings. I had to be pushed into a small back room, made to feel insignificant, just to finally remember that I was the owner, the true owner, not just of the house, but of my own life, my own dignity. It took that profound injustice, that painful stripping away of everything I thought I had, for me to remember who I truly was. I needed my own daughter, the one I had poured every ounce of my being into, the one I loved more than life itself, to humiliate me, to discard me like an old, worn-out possession. I needed that deep, searing pain to rediscover something even more important than her love, my own self-respect. It's a hard truth, but sometimes love, that boundless, unconditional love we give, it blinds us. It makes us accept far less than we deserve. It makes us forget the very real value of our own hard work, our own sacrifices, our own worth. We just keep giving, hoping for a return that never comes, or worse, for an acknowledgement that is withheld. We give so much, don't we? We pour ourselves out, annul ourselves so much for those we love, for our children, our families. We put them first, always. Their needs, their comforts, their happiness. We tell ourselves it's what a good parent does, a good spouse, a good family member. And in doing so, in constantly putting ourselves last, we run the risk of becoming invisible. Invisible in their eyes, yes. They stop seeing us as people with our own dreams, our own needs, our own lives. We become just a function, a resource. But even worse, far worse, is when we become invisible in our own eyes, when we forget who we are outside of that role, when we lose sight of the unique, strong person we were before we started giving everything away. We forget our strength. We forget the battles we've already won, often alone, against impossible odds. We forget the quiet power we have over our own lives, over our own choices. I know I did. For years, I simply existed for them, for my daughter and her family. I thought that was enough. I thought that was what made me valuable. It took me a long, painful time to understand this, to break free from that illusion. But I understood it in time, just in time. And you? Have you ever felt like a tenant in your own story, waiting for recognition that never comes? And you? Have you ever felt like a tenant in your own story, waiting for recognition that never comes? It's a question that weighs heavy, isn't it? Because I truly believe so many of us have. So many have given so much, only to feel overlooked, undervalued, or pushed aside. My journey is quiet fight for my home and my dignity. It's just one story, but I know it's a reflection of countless others out there. Stories of resilience, of finding your voice when you thought it was lost, of reclaiming what's truly yours. These are the real stories, the raw ones, the ones that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. They're the truths whispered from one heart to another, carrying lessons learned through hard-won experience. And if you want to keep receiving real stories like this, stories that might just be the mirror you need or the quiet nudge towards your own strength, then please pay attention. YouTube might be unsubscribing you without warning. It's a funny thing how easily we can lose connection, even to the very things that help us feel understood. So, take a moment, confirm you're still subscribed to the channel, and activate the bell icon. It's just a little gesture, but it means these tales, these shared moments of truth, can keep finding their way to you. Because knowing you're not alone, knowing there are others,